The American government has gone on an absolute bender recently, with the last couple of years showing trillions of dollars in deficits. Not spending, but deficits. A deficit is spending beyond the income that you have. So we've seen $6 to $7 trillion budgets from the government, and it has caused some of the biggest inflation this country has seen in decades, and by some measures, the biggest inflation this country has ever seen. And now we're faced with the prospect of the Federal Reserve tightening to the point where we could expect job losses and bankruptcies and market crashes, which means Americans have spent the last 2 years with prices going up faster than they've ever gone up in our lifetimes on one end, and then on the other end, those same American households facing the prospects of losing their jobs. And I always say that the Federal Reserve and the government right now are in between a rock and a hard place, because you're facing hyperinflation on one side and a deflationary death spiral on the other side. But it's not as if there's no choice. In fact, one of the most common questions that I get in the comment section of these videos is, hey, you point out a lot of things wrong with the country, a lot of things wrong with the way policy is done. What's the alternative? What's your solution? What should be done instead? And that is what this video is about. And I'm going to give you a 5-step plan that, if implemented, would absolutely set America straight on the path to global supremacy and financial wealth like this world has never seen. Ready? Let's dive in. One big disclaimer before we jump into this 5-step plan is that it's going to be highly controversial here. And I want to let you know that while this plan is not what I would consider ideal, this is a plan that would work, number one, and number two, won't leave anybody high and dry who needs help. That's the biggest argument against people's plans who advocate cutting government spending. They're saying, hey, you're going to just leave all these people in need. You're going to leave them. They're going to be homeless. They're going to go out on the streets. I want you to pay attention here, because we are not going to do that. We're not going to leave anybody high and dry who needs help. So step number one, end Medicare. But wait, I just said we're not going to leave anybody high and dry who needs help. And that's right, because there's this other thing called Medicaid. If you're not aware, Medicare is age-based, Medicaid is needs-based. They're both government forms of healthcare, government paying for your healthcare. Medicare pays for your healthcare if you're above a certain age. Medicaid pays for it if you need it, based on income. So why would we want to end Medicare? Well, first of all, let's take a look at this chart to see total Medicare spending from 1970 to 2021. We can see it's absolutely ballooned to the tune of about $900 billion over the last couple of years. The other thing that we know is that statistically, the number one predictor of wealth in America is age. That's right. The older somebody is, the higher likelihood they have of being wealthy. That means that a taxpayer-funded program called Medicare takes money away from the people who statistically have the least of it to pay for something for the people who statistically have the most of it. Because Medicare is not needs-based, it's age-based. So I do not want to hear a single person say, oh, we need to tax the rich, we need to create an inheritance tax, we need to increase the estate tax, we need to take away everything from everybody when they die, if they're not first ending Medicare. It makes no sense to be transferring wealth away from the entire population to pay for the healthcare of rich old people so that they can have a larger inheritance. That makes absolutely no sense. They should have to pay for all of their medical expenses, and when they run out of money, there's Medicaid. Now you might say, oh, there's not that many old people with a lot of money, so you're just going to be replacing all of Medicare with Medicaid. Well, let's take a look at the facts. The Minneapolis Fed at minneapolisfed.org recently did a study, and they found that eliminating Medicare would result in a net savings of 46 cents on the dollar from everybody who would switch over from Medicare to Medicaid. Now, they're framing that as a negative, saying, well, might as well just keep Medicare. But we spend $900 billion a year on Medicare, so shaving 46 cents off of every dollar cuts the total Medicare spending down to about $400 billion. That's not nothing. So cutting Medicare, eliminating Medicare, and leaving Medicaid in its place would be fair because number one, you stop transferring wealth from the entire population who has less money to a population demographic who has more money just for the purpose of causing them to not have to spend their money, which you're trying to tax that inheritance they're leaving behind anyway. So might as well stop the subsidy there, make them run out of money first, and then they can still get the health care they need through Medicaid. Nobody's left high and dry. And the government, or actually you and I, save 46 cents of every dollar. Step 2, this is going to be even more controversial. Eliminate Social Security. It's bankrupt. There's not enough money coming into Social Security to pay out what's going out, so end it. Is it fair to everybody who spent their entire lives paying into it and won't be getting a single dollar out of it? No, but guess what? They're not going to be getting that money anyway, because the dollars that they're going to be getting paid out from Social Security as it stands will not buy as much as the dollars they put in, because government has spent so much money, inflation has eroded the purchasing power of our dollars, that it's a done deal. You're not getting that money out no matter what. It's gone, it's spent, you won't get it. So might as well cut it off while it's clean, make sure that we can preserve as much of this nation as possible and get out of this with as much dignity as we can. Stop the irresponsible spending on Social Security, transferring again wealth from people who have less to statistically the people who have more. And guess what? You're probably asking the question, well, what about all those people that rely on Social Security just to make ends meet? You might not be aware, but there's another program out there called Supplemental Security Income. It provides monthly payments to meet basic needs for food, clothing, and shelter. Not everyone gets the same amount, and you're eligible to apply if you're over 65 and you have limited income and limited resources. So just like Medicare, Social Security is subsidizing the rich old people so they don't have to burn through their assets so they can preserve a larger inheritance. That's the point of building up a large nest egg as you grow up so that you don't have to be a burden on society and you can care for yourself in your old age. But guess what? If you weren't going to do that and you couldn't do that for some reason, there's supplemental security income. So we shouldn't be transferring wealth away from the entire working population just to subsidize the inheritances of the descendants of the rich. Let the old people burn through their resources, and if they still have life left at the end of their resources, there's supplemental security income to make up the gap. And the best part is, supplemental security income is a federal program that's funded by general tax revenues, which means that you don't run into the funding issues you have with Social Security, where they had to set up a legal loophole with this trust fund that has money going in and a specified number of dollars that are going out and caps on what can go in and caps on what can go out. It's a mess because it's actually illegal. So supplemental security income would be there for the old people who don't have any money left and who need some help. It's still there. And for the rest of everybody, use what you saved up your entire life. And for everybody who's put in and you're like 50 years old, 45 years old, and you're bitter because you're not going to get anything out, guess what? Like I said earlier, you weren't going to get it anyway. Inflation has already eroded most of the value of what you put in your entire life. Let's rip the Band-Aid off and stop wasting money and stop subsidizing the inheritances of the descendants of the wealthy. Number 3 is end all federal spending on education. If we take a look at usaspending.gov, we can see during the year of 2021 the categories that the United States spent the most money on. This category up here, this is obviously going to be skewed because this was stimulus checks and everything that was spent for I believe this was the Build Back Better plan. And so we have Social Security spending here, we have healthcare or Medicare spending right here, and then down here we've got education spending. So you might be thinking, hey, well, that's not going to move the needle. That's not a lot of money. But we have a big problem in this nation where we have multiple generations of people who were told their entire lives growing up, go to college, get any degree, and pay for it by whatever means necessary because it's worth it. And guess what? It wasn't worth it. They were lied to. You don't get ahead in life just from getting a piece of paper. You have to learn skills that have a positive ROI. And when you have the government subsidizing education, backing student loans, guaranteeing that lenders can't lose money because if you get a student loan, you can't bankrupt your way out of it. You have to pay it no matter what. And the lender gets off scot-free because it's backed by the government. Don't you think the costs on that product are going to get a little bit out of control? And without a federal guarantee and without all the federal subsidies, there would be skin in the game again. Nobody would get a degree unless they had a very high reason to believe that it was going to produce a positive ROI, which means suddenly the skills that you would learn in college would go back to the skills that are necessary to make more money, like science and technology and math and engineering and medical and law and the things that actually have a high ROI, not gender studies where you learn how to abuse kids. So eliminating education funding and subsidies and guarantees would put skin in the game. It would collapse the universities that are just making money and are not doing anything to provide the ROI, which is the reason you go buy a skill, is so you can make money on it. Otherwise, there's no reason for education. If you want the education for some mamby-pamby enlightenment thing, go do that on your own time after you've made the money to be able to afford that, and you deserve it. It's not necessary for somebody who's 18 or 19 years old who's going into life to try and provide for themselves and for those who rely on them. Number 4, this one might be the most controversial of all. Bring the military home. Make defense again. If it's offensive, it's not defense. And the military, if it is not purely defensive, it is violence, and it is the initiation of violence, which is wrong, and it should end. We have no business having a military base on every country on Earth acting as the police for the entire globe when we can't afford it and they don't want it or need it. The only winners in this global war on terror and this massive military industrial complex that has been built up over decades is the military contractors and the politicians who scratch each other's backs. It's not the American people, and it's certainly not all the countries that we've been bombing for decades. Bring the military home and turn it into defense again. And number 5, the last on the list, end the Fed. The Federal Reserve is the entity that is the bank to banks. And the fact that we have an entity doing this, acting as a central bank, means a couple of things. Number 1, the federal government gets unlimited spending power. Whenever the federal government needs to spend money, they either tax or they borrow. But if you have a central bank, you can simply print money that's able to be borrowed. This means that the Federal Reserve funds unlimited government spending under the guise of it being debt. It's not debt, it's money printing. And the fact that you can just continue to increase your debt means that it's not ever really repaid, which means that it's just inflation. Without the Federal Reserve there to monetize the federal government's debt, the federal government would actually have to pay its debt back, which would mean it would be susceptible to interest rate hikes, which would mean that they wouldn't be able to spend recklessly because then they would default because they wouldn't be able to afford to pay back their debt. The second thing that this would do is return interest rates to market forces, meaning that banks would be subject to the market again. They would be susceptible to failure, which means that they would have to make sure they're investing correctly and wisely and not recklessly and not foolishly. There would be skin in the game again, which would mean that financial institutions, corporations, and people would have to move back to a system of saving rather than constantly increasing debt. It would mean the economy is susceptible to a boom-bust cycle again, instead of constantly thinking that another bailout is around the corner, causing an increase in moral hazard and now record high inflation. And ending the Fed would ensure that the rest of the things that we've just done, the first 4 steps, would have to be done because without the Federal Reserve there to monetize government's debt and enable unlimited government spending, you wouldn't have the ability to continue on this reckless path, which means that the budget would be balanced again. It would be reduced. Now, after these 5 steps, you're probably doing the math along the way and thinking, hey, at best, this would cause, a $1 trillion, maybe $2 trillion reduction in government spending. But guess what? That's not the point. The point is not the absolute dollar amount that this would reduce in government spending, which, to be honest, it would probably be a lot more than $2 trillion given the fact that we're ending the Fed, which means that they'd be susceptible to interest rates going up again and their debt payment costs going up. But regardless of all of that, we have to look at the net effect that this would have on the overall economy, because with that much of a burden lifted from the American economy, just your Social Security alone, look at your paycheck. 6% of your paycheck goes to pay for Social Security, which you're never going to see again in your life. That's going off into the abyss, into the unknown, and it's gone. That's 6%, but you probably don't know your employer is also paying 6%. So your cost for you to have a job, 12% of the cost of employing you goes to pay old people that don't need it. Well, some of them need it, but if they still need it after Social Security is eliminated, they get supplemental security income. But that means 12% is freed up. What would you do with a 12% raise? Now, you might think, well, you're not going to get an entire 12% raise because the corporation's going to keep all that. You'll get the 6% back that you have to stop putting into it, but you're not going to get another 6% raise because the corporation's going to be greedy and they're going to keep that since they don't have to pay it anymore. But if that's true, what are you going to do knowing Social Security is not around? You're probably going to put more money into an IRA or a 401k because without a safety net, you have to do the work in order to be safe. You can't rely on the bailout. And so you're going to have to save for yourself. Part of that is investing. So if the corporation gets more money, gets to keep more profits, their stock price is going to go up, which means that when you invest your money, you're going to get most or some of that back from investing in those companies that all just got a major windfall. So the net result of this massive wart, this tumor being removed off the economy, means that people can breathe the fresh air of life again and will have a little bit more breathing room. Imagine what that does to productivity. People have more disposable income. Companies can invest more in research and development. You have more money that's able to be allocated according to individual decisions, which means more profit. It's not being sucked away and sent off to somebody else or to bomb somebody's kids overseas. So yes, the $1, $2, $3 trillion, whatever it ends up being, that reduces the government's budget will be good. But the net result of that being left in the hands of the decision makers in which it matters most will result in massive profits that will allow much more growth than just the $1 trillion net. It's not a zero-sum game. Allowing that all to stay in the hands of people and companies means that we're going to have a lot more growth as a result. And that's the point. That's why this 5-step plan would fix America. And that's why I'm calling this plan the Budget Reduction and Balancing Act, otherwise known as the BRB Act, because America's been gone for a while. But if we want to, we can BRB. God, that was corny. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys. You guys have a great day.